Dawn settled over northern Hungary with a quiet that felt almost unnatural. For a hot beat the world was still. Then Captain Istvan Dobo lifted his telescope and saw the horizon darken in a way no weather could explain. Something vast was moving across the plain. Something that swallowed the morning light and turned the earth to shadow. Behind him the walls of Eger were crowded with soldiers and civilians who sensed the change in the air before they understood it. A distant vibration in the ground. A rhythm like thunder. A slow rising roar that carried the weight of an approaching storm. Dobo lowered the scope. His voice was calm. His eyes were knit. They are coming. What he saw that morning would decide the fate of a fortress and perhaps the future of a continent. But no one in the walls of Eger yet understood the scale of what was approaching, or the price that would soon be paid. If you want to know how 2,000 people faced what should have been impossible, stay with this story. It begins with a single moment when the horizon went dark. By the middle of the 16th century, the world that surrounded Eger was shaped by an empire unlike any other. The Ottoman state was not a loose realm of tribes or princes. It was a vast undisciplined machine that stretched across continents. From the deserts of Arabia to the waters of the Persian Gulf, from the broken walls of Constantinople to the rich plains of the Balkans, the empire had expanded with a confidence that seemed unstoppable. At its head stood Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a ruler whose title had been earned through decades of conquest. He commanded armies that had learned to turn war into a science. They built bridges across rivers in hours. They cast Bren's cannons large enough to tear through fortresses that had stood for centuries. They fielded cavalry units that moved like a living storm across open plains. And at the heart of that military engine stood the Janissaries, soldiers raised from childhood to follow orders without hesitation. They lived with discipline that rivaled the most feared formations of ancient Rome. While the legions of the past followed the eagle's standard, the Janissaries followed a silent and absolute loyalty to their sultan. Europe knew the weight of this empire. Belgrade had fallen, Rhodes had fallen. The great victory at Mohacs had shattered the Hungarian kingdom in a single afternoon, leaving fields strewn with biddies and a country split into pieces. The Ottomans controlled the south, the Habsburgs held the west, and between them lay a thin fractured line of Hungarian fortresses clinging to independence like stones clinging to a riverbank in a flood. Eger stood in that line. A small fortress in a volcanic hill, guarding the road to the north. Beyond Eger lay the mountains, the mining towns, and the Lung road toward Vienna. If Eger fell, the Ottomans would have a clear path deeper into Europe. This was not only a Hungarian problem, it was a continental one. To Americans trying to understand the scale of this moment, it is useful to imagine a frontier fought during the early years of the American Revolution standing alone against the greatest army of its age. Or imagine a small band of Greek soldiers at Thermopylae staring down a Persian tide. That was the feeling across Europe in 1552. People watched the Ottoman frontier with the same anxiety that Americans once watched the Atlantic for the sails of European powers. When a fortress fell, whole regions shifted. When a garrison broke, thousands were enslaved. The stakes were not political theory or territory in a map. They were survival. Inside Eger, Captain Istvan Dobo understood this better than most. He had grown up along the frontier. He had seen villages burned, families dragged away, homes turned to ash. He knew that every fortress that surrendered made the next one weaker. Retreat long enough and eventually there is nowhere left to retreat to. For 3 years he had strengthened Eger's walls, repaired its old cannons, trained its garrison, and taught civilians how to carry supplies, how to put out fires, how to stay calm under bombardment. He expected the empire to come one day. He simply didn't know when. That day arrived in the 9th of September when the horizon darkened with an army large enough to swallow a kingdom. The Ottomans marched with 10,000 Janissaries, 15,000 cavalry, and an artillery force that had broken fortresses far stronger than Eger. They expected victory, they expected surrender. They expected the pattern of conquest to continue in an unbroken line. But what they found instead was a small community that had reached the edge of retreat and refused to take one step farther. In that refusal, the course of the coming battle was set. In the days before the first cannon fired, the atmosphere inside Eger shifted from anxious waiting to relentless preparation. Every corner of the fortress was alive with movement. Soldiers inspected their muskets on sharpened blades until sparks danced in the air. Civilians carried crates of water barrels on sacks of grain. Children ran messages across courtyards littered with rubble from the early bombardments. Captain Istvan Dobo walked the length of the walls each morning and evening, measuring the cracks forming in the stone, studying the movement of the Ottoman camp, and watching how his people handled the slow tightening pressure that comes before a storm becomes a battle. The defenders had few advantages. The cannons were old and many were cracked. The food would not last the winter. Most of the fighters were not soldiers by profession, but farmers, craftsmen, and refugees forced into a role they had never imagined. Yet as the days passed, something else emerged in Eger. A kind of unity that grows only when people accept they have new, when left to rely on but each other. Women organized supply stations where boiling water simmered in cauldrons, ready to be carried to the walls. Men who had never held a weapon learned to thrust with a spear, to brace a shield, to stand shoulder to shoulder, without stepping back. Priests moved through the ranks uttering quiet words not of glory, but of endurance. Everyone understood that in a siege, is not the strongest walls that matter, but the strongest wills. Among the civilians who shaped this rising resolve was Eva Cease, a widow who refused to flee north when others urged her to abandon her home. She trained with the muskets alongside younger women until her shoulders ached. She hauled water up steep stairs again and again, learning to keep her grip steady, even when arrows drifted overhead. She was not fighting for a king or a cause. She was fighting because surrender meant losing the last piece of her life that still belonged to her. Nearby, the nervous young clerk, Georgely Bonamissa, struggled in the earthworks, digging trenches and carrying stones. His hands blistered and bled, but he kept working, driven by the same unspoken truth that pulsed through the entire fortress. If they did not stand here, they would stand nowhere. Each night the valley below glowed with Ottoman campfires, stretching so far that their light looked like stars fallen to earth. The sound of drums and the clang of metal carried across the fields. The defenders tried to sleep, but sleep rarely came. The walls trembled under the impact of early cannon shots. Dust drifted from the ceilings of barracks and storerooms. In the dark, soldiers and civilians alike lay awake, listening to the deep bass of distant artillery, the rhythm like a giant heartbeat reminding them that the empire outside was waiting, watching, calculating. Dobo understood that fear spreads faster than fire inside a besieged fortress. So he turned preparation into ritual. At dawn, soldiers lined the ramparts, and Dobo walked before them, speaking with the steady tone of someone who did not allow doubt to speak. He reminded them of what lay behind them, their homes, their families, their history, and he reminded them of what lay in front of them. An empire that believed Eger could be taken with routine precision. He refused to let that belief take root inside his walls. Every evening he spoke with his officers in the command tower. They studied the Ottoman trenches, creeping closer day by day. They counted their dwindling ammunition and discussed how to use the smaller cannons not for destruction, but for disruption. They planned countermining in advance, knowing the Ottomans would eventually try to tunnel beneath the walls. Their strategy was not to win through strength, but to survive through resilience. By the second week, the first heavy bombardment began. The ground shook as stone balls the size of millstones slammed into the ramparts. Entire sections of wall shuddered, cracks widened into jagged scars. But earthworks that Dobo had ordered years earlier absorbed the worst of the impact. Teams of workers rushed into the dust to reinforce damaged areas with timber and rubble. Women joined them carrying baskets of stones, while children filled buckets of water to douse fires sparked by burning wicks. Through it all, the defenders moved with a rhythm that felt almost ritualistic. They endured the explosions. They braced the walls. They fought panic with motion. Every task served a single purpose: to make the Ottomans pay for every inch of ground they believed they would take easily. At night, after the smoke settled and the last echoes of cannon fear drifted into silence, a strange calm fell over the fortress. Lanterns flickered along the battlements. The wind carried the scent of burned wood mixed with cold earth. People gathered in small circles, whispering stories of past battles or moments of home now far away. They spoke not to find courage, but to remember who they were before the siege began. And above them, Ispan Doba stood at the highest point of the eastern wall, staring into the darkness beyond the tents. He knew the real storm had not yet come. The first assault would arrive soon, and with it, the test that would decide whether Eger would stand or fall. The plain below was quiet, but the quiet held a tension like a bowstring pulled to its limit. The Empire was watching, the defenders were waiting, and history was gathering its breath. The first true assault came before sunrise and a cold, September morning. Fig drifted across the plain like a thin veil, but the sound beneath it was unmistakable. Drums, slow at first, then rising in tempo until the earth itself seemed to pulse. Men hurried to the battlements, gripping weapons with trembling hands. Women dragged cauldrons to the walls. Children ran supplies from tower to tower, while priests whispered quiet prayers that dissolved into the wind. Captain Istvan Dobo stood at the center of the eastern wall. As the fig potted on the full force of the empire revealed itself, thousands of Janissaries advanced in perfect formation. They moved without speaking. No shouting. No roar of courage. Only silence broken by the pounding of drums. These were soldiers raised from childhood to obey without question. They carried lingladas polished smooth by years of siege warfare. They carried shields held overhead in a tight shell designed to deflect arrows. Their discipline felt inhuman. Their approach felt inevitable. Dobo waited. Every Hungarian defender waited. The order was clear. No one fired until the enemy reached 50 yards. The distance closed with terrifying speed. Arrows began to hiss upward. Stones rattled against shields. The first ladders slammed against the wall. Then Dobo raised his arm on the fortress erupted. Cannons roared. Muskets cracked. Grape shit tore through the front ranks of the attackers, sending biddies spinning backward into the mud. Crossbow bolts thudded into shields and armor. Smoke wrapped around the battlements like a living thing. Still the Janissaries climbed. One reached the top only to be met by a spear thrust into his chest. Another swung a curved sword only to be necked backward by a shield ram. A ladder tipped and fell, carrying half a dozen soldiers with it. They screamed as they crashed into the wrecks below, but more men stepped over them and kept advancing. Women joined the defense without hesitation. Under Eva Cease's direction, they lifted cauldrons of boiling water and poured them down the ladders. The liquid hit armor and flesh with a shriek that rose above the noise of battle. Men dripped their weapons and clawed at their own faces. Some fell backward. Others tried to keep climbing only to collapse moments later. The women didn't pause. They hauled more water. They hauled oil. They hauled anything that could slow the relentless climb. One assault followed another. Each wave seemed heavier than the last. The air filled with smoke and dust. Stones split under impact. Arrows snapped underfoot. Men slipped and blood slicked across the battlements. Every defender fought at arm's length, swinging axes, pushing ladders, stabbing at hands that gripped the parapet. There was no space for fear. Only motion. Only survival. By mid-morning, the biddies of hundreds of Ottoman soldiers lay against the base of the wall. Some were still alive, groaning in pain. Others stared upward with empty eyes. The Janissaries finally withdrew in disciplined order, dragging their wounded behind them. The defenders sagged against the battlements, exhausted. But this was only the beginning. The next threat came from below. Ottoman engineers began to dig. Their miners worked beneath the earth-coving tunnels toward the foundations. The defenders placed bowls of water in the ground inside the fortress, watching for ripples that signaled enemy digging. When the ripples appeared, Dobo sent countermining teams to meet them underground. One team included the clock Georgely Bonamissa, whose sift hands had hardened through weeks of work. He crawled into a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a man to move. The light was dim, the air head unstale. Every breath tasted of earth and fear. Then they heard it. Scraping. Picking. Voices in the other side. The enemy was close. When the tunnels met, the fighting was immediate. No room to swing a sword. No room to flee. Men grappled by touch alone. Daggers flashed in the dark. Picks struck bone. Someone screamed. Someone choked. A lamp fell unshattered, plunging everything into darkness. Bonamissa felt hands in him. He stabbed blindly again and again until the biddy pressed against him went limp. The defenders collapsed the tunnel with barrels of rubble, then lit a small charge. The explosion shook the entire fortress. Dust shot upward. Soldiers flinched, thinking the walls had fallen. But when the dust cleared, the bastion still stood. The Ottomans tried again. And again. Each time the Hungarians met them beneath the ground, fighting in tunnels, where the air burned the lungs and the darkness swallowed faces before they could be remembered. Every success cost blood. Every collapse cost strength. Yet the walls held. Days became weeks. Bombardment thundered morning and night. The walls trembled. Cracks widened. The fortress shuddered under each blow. Food dwindled. Gunpowder dwindled. Ammunition ran low. The wounded filled the chapel where women tended them without rest. Infection spread. Fever rose. Hope thinned. Then came October the 3rd, the largest assault yet. 15,000 Ottoman soldiers advanced at once. The defenders barely had 500 fighters left. The math was cruel. The walls were long. The men were few. The women stepped in again, carrying boiling water and firewood. They fought with anything they could hold. Stones, knives, broken spears. The air filled with screams and smoke. The eastern wall nearly broke. The southern bastion shook. Ladders rose in dozens. Janissaries climbed in swarms. But the defenders didn't give way. Among the case, Eva Cease burned her hands carrying a cauldron so hot, the metal steamed in the cold air. She spilled boiling oil over a cluster of soldiers climbing a ladder. They fell shrieking. She kept fighting until her strength failed and she stumbled back, tears streaming from pain and exhaustion. Dobo found her later sitting in the chapel steps staring at her blistered hands. She asked how much longer they could last. He answered only as long as they must, though in his heart he feared the end was close. By mid-October ammunition was nearly gone. Food was scarce. People were starving. Dobo turned to deception. He ordered fake troop movements with torches to make the garrison seem larger. He ordered the cannons to fire in patterns that suggested plenty of powder. He ordered the defenders to sing so loudly their voices carried across the valley. The Ottomans believed reinforcements had arrived. Doubt crept into their camp. Still the empire prepared one final assault. October 17. Before dawn the cannonade began. It sounded like the world breaking apart. Walls collapsed in clouds of dust. The southern bastion cracked from base to summit. Then the cannon stopped, and the drums began again. 25,000 soldiers attacked from every direction, the breaches filled with fighting so close men could smell each other's breath. Janissaries flooded through gaps swinging swords in tight arcs. Dobo led a counterattack with 50 men pushing the enemy back step by step. Half his force fell. He didn't stop. Women fought beside soldiers in the walls. Children carried stones to plug openings. Every defender became a final line. Hours passed. The Ottomans pushed but the defenders wouldn't break. The assault slowed, then faltered, then collapsed under its own weight. By afternoon the attackers were too exhausted to continue. They pulled back, leaving the ground covered in biddies. The defenders stood in silence, barely alive but still standing. The fortress had not fallen. When dawn rose in the 18th of October, the defenders of Eger heard something they had not heard in 39 days. Silence. No cannon fire. No drums. No shouted orders rolling across the valley. Scouts climbed the walls expecting a trick, expecting movement in the morning fog. What they found instead was an empty plain. The Ottoman camp had vanished. Tents were gone. Siege works were abandoned. Only scattered debris remained where an empire had once stood. It took time for the truth to settle. The Ottomans had withdrawn. The impossible had happened. A fortress defended by 2,000 souls had survived an assault by 40,000. There was no celebration. The survivors were too exhausted to cheer. Many simply collapsed to their knees. Some wept quietly. Others stayed at the empty horizon trying to understand that they were still alive. Captain Istvan Dobo walked the ruined walls in silence. Stones lay shattered. Buildings had burned. Courtyards were choked with rubble on with the biddies of friends he had commanded. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a heavy breath finally released. Yet as the hours passed, another feeling slowly rose through the grief. The realization that what they had done mattered far beyond the walls of Eger. Their resistance had halted the Ottoman advance into northern Hungary. It had protected the towns beyond them. It had proven that the strongest empire in the world could be stopped not by a great army, but by ordinary people who refused to surrender. News spread across Europe faster than the smoke from the last fears. In Vienna and Prague and Rome, people spoke the name Eger with awe. The fortress that should have fallen had held. A handful of soldiers and civilians had rewritten the expectations of a continent. What Eger demonstrated was simple and universal. Power is not absolute. Numbers are not destiny. The will of a community joined in purpose can alter the course of history. In that truth the defenders found meaning. They had endured fear and starvation and fire. They had held fast when logic said they would break. And in doing so they left behind something greater than victory. They left a reminder that courage is a force that can't be measured in ranks or cannons or flags. It lives in people who stand when standing seems hopeless. If stories like this speak to you, then stay with us. The Siege of Eger is not only a chapter in Hungarian history. It is a reminder that courage can rise from the most unexpected places, and that ordinary people can shape the fate of nations. If you want to explore more moments where resilience changed the world, consider joining this journey into the past. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive and helps them reach others who value the lessons history is. Thank you for being here. Let us continue discovering the human spirit together.